Hello, everyone. My name's Chitong. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Engage Rocket, and thank you very much for joining us today for our webcast series. Today, we're going to be discussing practical ways to use data to make better people decisions from hire to retire. So over the next 30 minutes or so, I'm going to be walking through some of the tips that we've gotten from working with more than 37,000 users over 14 different markets in 20 over industries here in Asia Pacific, and sharing some of those insights with you today on this webcast. There will also be some time towards the end for some Q&A. So please feel free to use the Q&A function to lodge your questions. My team is on standby to organize them. So let's get started. So my name is Chitong once again, and Engage Rocket's mission is really to help companies to gain employee insights across their entire life cycle and to provide real-time analytics on what employees think and feel. So we do this from hire to retire, all in service of being able to support higher retention rates as well as higher productivity and increased productivity. We have three main modules. We help talents in companies to belong, grow, and perform. So belong deals with employee life cycle surveys, so all the collecting insights from onboarding all the way to separation. And we provide those insights at the team and organization level. For Grow, we collect insights about each individual and surface those in reports to them. So 360 feedback, peer evaluations, really to identify competency and skill gaps in order for your talent to develop themselves and for you to help develop them. Finally, we also are going to be launching Perform next year, which we are very excited about, as we are going to be supporting a continuous performance management process which will help companies to make improvements on their performance day by day. We're very privileged to be delighting customers across all different industries. As we mentioned, we cover 14 different industry segments along all, and these are some examples of the customers that we work with. So today, these are the three things that I'm going to be covering. I'm going to be touching on the employee experience and employee engagement and how companies can use data to improve both of these in their teams and in their organizations. Secondly, we'll cover why organizations should care. And finally, we'll touch on how you can actually go about implementing this today. So for employee engagement and experience, this is something that is a relatively recent phenomenon in which companies have been applying people analytics to. So in the past, the way that employee engagement was measured was quite simple. Either there was not measured at all, or you run a survey and you take the insights from those surveys and try to build actions around it. But the analysis was relatively rudimentary and it didn't really link with anything else within the company's data sets with very, very rudimentary, maybe department cards or slices of data that you'd see. And there's a good reason for that. People analytics has only started very recently becoming a business discipline. So if we look at this chart from Bursin by Deloitte, we'd see that there are 4 different levels of people analytics. And for most companies, this is a study done by companies in the West and in Asia Pacific, we see quite similar ratios to this. But we find that most companies are operating still in a very reactive operational reporting when it comes to HR data or people data. So employee engagement survey, for example, is a very good is a good case in which the reporting is done very ad hoc, maybe once a year, once every 2 years, and it's reactive to business demand. So maybe the CEO has decided that we're going through a lot of change. We better take the pulse of our employees. the employee engagement survey. But the data is isolated, one-off, and then if we want to analyze it and compare it with previous years, it might be very difficult to do. About 30% of companies report that they are at a proactive level of people analytics. So um, benchmarking and decision making is already done, so they are able to compare themselves against others. Multidimensional analysis and dashboards. So this is where you start integrating some of your data from your surveys to perhaps which departments are not feeling as good as other departments. Comparing across time and across companies, we can then put this together on a dashboard and plan our interventions. However, as we can see, that's not necessarily enough, right? Level 3 deals with strategic analytics, where we start being able to build people models and get more scientific about how we go about analyzing what our people care about. And essentially, we're trying to establish cause and effect between what people care about and what the company is actually doing. And finally, all of this leads up to, I guess, the pinnacle of people analytics, where we get into predictive modeling. So being able to plan scenarios. For example, very simply, if I were to spend $5 million on free lunches for my team over the next year versus $5 million in upgrading the office furniture, which would create more productivity, which would create better retention. Today, only 4% of companies report that they are able to generate that answer, which is perfectly fine for a relatively new business discipline. When it comes to the employee experience, it's costly to replace people. For disengaged employees who leave, these are sometimes called regrettable attrition or voluntary attrition, and such attrition costs up to $41,000 just to replace that one person. And this factors in rehiring, retraining costs, the lost productivity from having a vacancy, and the lost productivity from having people within that team come up and step forward to be able to take on that role of the missing person. The upside of the employee experience, on the other hand, is also quite well established. So when we look at studies done by multiple different companies, the facts around employee engagement are very clear. You can actually improve your earnings per share in a company by 147%, improve the profitability of your company by up to 51%, and improve productivity on your teams by 21%. And this is it's already very well established, and the numbers might differ from company to company, but you consistently see that engagement and employee experience makes a meaningful difference to your bottom line. And so how do we go about measuring and capturing and predicting employee behavior? Interestingly, back in 2018, the Harvard Business Review covered this article. There was a study done by the head of people operations and the head of people analytics at Facebook, in conjunction with Professor Adam Grant, who's one of the youngest professors who received tenure at the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania. And with so much intellectual firepower in this study, it was really interesting to see that to be able to measure engagement in companies, actually the best way to do that is through employee surveys. And what the article goes into, it's not traditional employee surveys which are done on pen and paper or done kind of ad hoc on your own, but a way in which surveys become a platform for data collection versus just a one-off standalone program for employee engagement. So moving towards this platform is something that we've seen within the industry as an important trend. So as we discussed earlier, we start out with this stage of evolution in many companies today still fall into this category, even if they have more than 200 employees. So this was something that surprised us at Engage Rocket as we approached the market and tried to understand this a little bit better. We found that more than half of companies actually didn't do any surveys at all of their people. And if this is one of the most effective ways that we're collecting employee engagement data, if we're collecting employee experience data, and this is coming from the top minds in the world and a company that is renowned for its big data analytics capabilities, then this is scary for companies who are still within a 0.0 environment. Because these companies essentially are making decisions about their engagement, about their employee experience that are driven only by gut feel, which is prone to a host of different biases. Worse, they're also making these decisions on anecdotal evidence, things that we hear, rumors that we hear while standing around in the water cooler. If we think about the amount of money that companies spend on their people, easily you're looking at between 60 to 80% in knowledge economy companies. 60 to 80% of your operating expenses are going to your people, whether it's to salaries or to incentive schemes to try to keep them, or benefits. And if you're making decisions about 60 to 80% of your operating expenses driven by gut feel and anecdotal evidence, something must be going wrong. So some companies, another 30 to 35% of companies have moved towards engagement 1.0. And this is something that has been in place for more than 3 decades. This is new, but it's the top-down annual engagement survey. And I'll say that compared to a 0.0 environment, this is still way better. That you can at least have some data, which is much better than no data. So this data actually does give you some generic insights. So it tells you, for example, how you might compare against a database of companies on, say, the clarity of expectations at work or whatever it may be. And because it happens so infrequently, it's a little bit of a vanity exercise. So you focus a lot on benchmarking within the different departments in your company. For example, we used to see companies present these slides on engagement by departments. And that's important to do. We call it the beauty parade slide because the department heads that did well, they start to strut around the room and preen themselves. And the departments that didn't do so well, they start covering their faces and trying to hide. But at the end of the day, while it's useful to shed some light on engagement in that way, it in itself doesn't really drive action. It's still very programmatic. The communication is very one way. It's really left to the individual managers whether or not they want to share the insights from that survey with the rest of their team. So what we've seen in the last 3 to 4 years has been a shift of some companies, the most progressive companies, towards what we call engagement 2.0, which is moving away from programs and employee engagement programs towards an employee engagement platform. So what does that mean? Employee engagement programs are very one-off and they're standalone. So they might be a measurement program, for example, where you have a big exercise through the company to collect feedback and to communicate that out. But after that program ends, after that project ends, the HR team that was involved in it kind of moves on with their lives and focus on other areas of talent management. The business leaders that got their data, there are other programs and projects to turn their attention to. So it's not something that's always on. It's not something that's continuous and making improvements on a day-to-day basis. A platform, on the other hand, provides a baseline of measurement and analysis to be able to help the company understand the pulse of its employees at any point in time. Plus, leaders are able to also understand how their employees are thinking and feeling in real time and able to address any issues and nip them in the bud before they become larger. with such a system, there is the ability to run agile surveys over the life cycle. If we need to pulse the employee base about a specific topic, we can do that immediately. Action planning then becomes much more intelligent because you're able to correlate your actions with actual data that has surfaced within the surveys. Plus, having open communications, multi-channel communications in two ways allows employee engagement to really happen in real time and to be able to address challenges within the employee experience immediately. So this is especially important in an age where leaders, teams are so disparate. They're very dispersed across geographically and by time. And there can be cases in which team managers never even meet their team in person for weeks or months. So to be able to understand how they're feeling in real time is an enormous advantage for these companies and teams. So when we think about the employee journey from hire to retire, as they say, from onboarding to separation, there are these different stages to it. And if we're going to be making better people decisions, we need to be looking at each of these stages and thinking about how we can optimize them. So today, many companies are already doing the employee engagement survey, or the EES, as they call it, which is very helpful. Some companies have also started doing other feedback collection programs. So you start having onboarding experience surveys, for example, 360 feedback that's being collected, exit interviews, evaluations, post-training, peer reviews, pulse surveys, and so on. Even after major employee milestones like relocations, lateral moves, to be able to start collecting feedback from them. So all that's really exciting. But the problem that you'd face if you're one of the companies collecting feedback in this way is that you have, number one, a lot of data that sits in a lot of different places. And number two, it's really hard to pull all of that data together. So why should we invest that effort to be able to do that? And how can we pull all of that data together? We're gonna be touching on that towards the third segment of this webinar. But first, let's look at why organizations should even care about investing that effort. So this is an example that was quite interesting. A few years ago, a father in the United States received some marketing brochures from Target that were directed at his daughter. His daughter was 16 years old, and he saw these marketing brochures marketing essentially baby products and maternity products. So he got very upset, and he lodged a formal complaint against Target for essentially encouraging his daughter to get pregnant. However, when that started becoming more heated in that discussion, the daughter actually admitted to her father that she was indeed pregnant, and essentially the marketing that was targeted to her was based on the behavior that she exhibited at Target, which is a department store that covers toiletries, pharmacies, and other items in the United States. So how was Target able, without even knowing this person, predict that she was pregnant and therefore target marketing towards her? It's through these few points. Number one, they collected personal identifiable information from her. So they knew her spending patterns because they knew her name, they knew her contact details. They could link her purchases to those details. And they noticed that she was buying products that correlated very highly with people who are pregnant and in the second trimester. So you might not be able to tell visually that they're pregnant, but she was buying unscented lotion, calcium, magnesium, and zinc supplements, which is unusual for regular people to buy. And 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 so through this combination of data analytics, Target was able to predict essentially when their customers are getting pregnant. And when we apply this internally to what we know about our people in our companies, what should we then be able to predict and support? Not predicting in a creepy way, but obviously predicting in a way that helps support an improved employee experience, improved employee engagement. This is exceedingly important in a time where business is really moving 4 times faster. If we look at the average lifespan of companies in the S&P 500 index, which is an index of the 500 largest companies in the world, we find that there are the average lifespan has shrunk by more than 4 times since 100 years ago. And if you look at the Fortune 500, Capgemini found that half of the Fortune 500 in the year 2000 are already gone. So gone in the sense that they have gone bankrupt, they cease to exist, and or they've been acquired. So it's a big deal that they have that the pace of disruption and change is so fast. At the same time, you also find changing demands on HR. So within all of these different areas, we find that the business demanding all of these from HR. And we can share this chart after this webinar as well. But basically, we're starting to see that HR is no longer expected just to perform an administrative function. Now we're also seeing that HR is required to do more strategic, predictive analyses to be able to support the business in a strategic way. And ultimately, even within HR, if you look at the gray line here, this represents the contribution to the company from an employee without running any kind of analytics. So they start here, they ramp, and then they contribute over time before they leave. And today we've long since left the time of full employment for life. On average, companies are now finding that their average length of stay of people are between 4 to 5 years. So the reality is that people are going to leave, but what can we do to improve their contribution in the time that they do spend with us? So number one, we can shorten the time to productivity. We can improve their onboarding experience such that they become more productive in a shorter period of time, plus apply analytics to their development to extend their potential, as well as to improve the retention rates over time. And this is the promise of applying analytics to the employee experience. The big question to HR is what is most critical now. So this is where analytics in itself is not going to be able to solve for us in HR. We need to have that conversation with the business and use our own business judgment and business acumen to identify where we need to focus on, because we can't be doing everything. So how do we get started? What are some practical ways to use data to make better people decisions? One of the examples in the technology industry that we've seen is from Amazon, actually. So Amazon is an enormous company with almost 566,000 employees globally, all the way down to warehouse packers, to Jeff Bezos himself at the top. And in 2015, there was a scathing New York Times article about the culture in Amazon, how there were people who were burnt out badly and still forced to work, people working during sick days, being unable to take any annual leave. And essentially, that was a massive turnoff for the kind of talent that Amazon was trying to attract to grow, to achieve their growth goals. So what Jeff Bezos commissioned in 2015, after that article hit in the New York Times, was what's known as the Connections Program. So the Connections Program essentially is a team of analysts within Amazon who ask one question a day to everybody within Amazon, all the employees within Amazon, to understand their thoughts about their manager, even tactical things like how happy they are with the length of meetings that they have, any kind of positive feedback that they receive, and follow-ups from uh, previous leadership actions. And they ask different questions to different people uh, on different days. So within the same day, the CEOs of the different markets might receive questions that are different from the warehouse packers, who would be different from questions from people in finance and operations, and so on. And what this connections team did within the program is start analyzing patterns across all of these different functions, across the different stages of employee life cycle, to be able to come up with insights to improve the workplace and the employee experience within Amazon. And since they started that, they've seen dramatically improved ratings on Glassdoor. Even on LinkedIn, they found themselves highlighted as the most desirable place to work. And so this is just for a company of this size to make such big changes within a relatively short period of time, speaks a lot to the power of analytics. One of the things that we've seen companies do with this data is to build employee personas. So the reason that they will do that is very similar to why marketing teams and strategy teams build customer personas, is to be able to personalize the experience to each of these personas. So being able to map that data that you're collecting into a single source of truth is one way to start building your personas. And there's no cookie cutter way to do this. It's slightly different for every single company. Just like it's different for every single company when you're building your customer personas. But being able to use insights and methodologies from customer analytics to improve employee experience and to improve the way that you do employee analytics is really something that's quite revolutionary that we've seen over the past 3 years. So being able to map out that journey and find moments of truth, there are so many things that your employees are going through while they're with you in your company, and there are different types and personas of employees that are going to be experiencing one or more of these different moments of truth as to whether their company cares for them, whether their leaders care for them or not. How do we put this all into a single platform? And ultimately, what is really important is not just that you collect this data and analyze it, but that you pass this information to managers. And when I say managers, I mean managers at all levels of the organization, because they are the main conduit through which an employee experiences the company. So in fact, some studies have shown that managers' impact on the employee experience is actually 70%. So when we collect data and generate insight, we need a way to be able to send this to managers at every level of the organization and pretty much in real time, because it needs to arrive to them in a way that they can actually take action on it. So using a platform rather than a program is one way to do that. So software platforms like Engage Rocket are able to deliver you targeted insights for very surgical action at the HR level, but also because it's so targeted and these reports are generated and sent immediately to your team managers, they then are equipped with information as well that they need in a timely manner that they can take action on it without the information going stale. You're also able to run one of the examples, for example, of people analytics today is to be able to really move the needle on employee experience. So running impact analyses using multiple different regressions would be able to highlight for you what are some areas that need urgent attention to move the needle on employee loyalty or employee experience. You also want to be able to have two-way communications. So being able to clarify what employees say in their feedback in an anonymized environment is also something that you should look out for in the kind of platforms that you acquire for your teams, because this allows you to save time from having to do a lot of a lot of focus groups and grope around in the dark without really understanding verbatim feedback. I'll give you an example. So if you have a lot of feedback coming through saying that work-life balance is an issue, then you might be tempted to set aside a program where you have 5 different focus groups with 5 different employee types to try to tease out what do they mean by work-life balance. However, with a tool that allows you to do anonymized confidential chats, you can actually immediately ask, so what do you mean by work-life balance? And have the employee tell you, oh, I actually have my daughter who leaves childcare every day at 6:30. I'm forced to stay in office until 6. Is there a way that I could just work earlier and leave earlier so that I don't have to rush and I'm not always late to pick her up? And that immediately can be actioned upon without having to run months of focus groups just to get to that point. So ultimately, it's about the change in the workplace that we're seeing. We're moving towards a future of work in which employees no longer care as much about the basics of their work life and are now instead caring a lot more on their growth and development and fulfillment at work. So being able to tie the analytics that we're collecting and the data that we're collecting about our people to support them along all of these different functions would be extremely important. So one way to do that would be through lightweight, fast peer reviews and 360 feedback or multi-rated performance feedback that can allow each individual leader, each individual contributor to be able to see where their competency gaps are, what people feel that they need to develop, and then start planning actions using that information without having very heavy 180 question 360 feedback programs that you need to run. And ultimately, to be able to have action plans and individual development plans surfaced based on the data that you've seen. So those are just some ways that we've seen companies adapt analytics to be able to improve their employee experience and make better people decisions in real time in a very practical way. The way that we've built Engage Rocket has been really to respond to what we've seen in the market. And so a lot of what you see while it's available on Engage Rocket, if you can build it yourself, that you can also try to do that. It's just a lot more efficient having a platform and professionals that can support you. So by all means, feel free to reach out to us after this webinar to ask for a demo by our qualified professionals who can show you how exactly you can deliver some of these insights to your leaders and your managers in real time so that they can enjoy better productivity from their team. And ultimately, you can take credit within HR as well. We have some research as well. If you'd like to download that, you can either click on this QR code to get it immediately, or you can wait for us to share this with you after this webinar. So that brings me to the end of the webinar. I'm just going to check if there's any questions so far. It doesn't look like there are any questions, but feel free to reach out to me or anyone on my team if you would like to clarify or expand on any of the points that were shared today. Thank you very much for your time, and look forward to speaking with you in our next webinar, which will be coming up very shortly. So stay tuned for that. Thank you and goodbye.